that he did not.
33-year-old Theodore Bundy is charged with beating and strangling two Florida State University sorority sisters and attempting to kill another woman student in January 1978. His trial was transferred to Miami after Judge Edward Cowart found that choosing an impartial jury in Tallahassee would be difficult. Selection of the 12-person jury began yesterday in Miami. Unlike most murder trials, this one will feature the defendant helping four public defenders in cross-examining witnesses. Bundy, a former law student at the University of Utah, has already complained to the judge that his jail cell is not adequate for his legal research. The judge ordered the jail to change that. Inside the courtroom, the trial will be covered by a still photographer and one television camera. Upstairs, there are some 250 reporters and television technicians from around the country. They will be following the trial and making videotape recordings of it. The Bundy trial is expected to last more than a month, according to the judge. Before the trial begins, Bundy's lawyers will ask
report a number of people killed and wounded. The trial of a man accused of killing two girls in a sorority house in Tallahassee, Florida, is having a difficult time getting underway. Ike Siemens is covering this case.
That he did not.
33-year-old Theodore Bundy is charged with beating and strangling two Florida State University sorority sisters and attempting to kill another woman student in January 1978. His trial was transferred to Miami after Judge Edward Cowart found that choosing an impartial jury in Tallahassee would be difficult. Selection of the 12-person jury began yesterday in Miami. Unlike most murder trials, this one will feature the defendant helping four public defenders in cross-examining witnesses. Bundy, a former law student at the University of Utah, has already complained to the judge that his jail cell is not adequate for his legal research. The judge ordered the jail to change that. Inside the courtroom, the trial will be covered by a still photographer and one television camera. Upstairs, there are some 250 reporters and television technicians from around the country. They will be following the trial and making videotape recordings of it. The Bundy trial is expected to last more than a month, according to the judge. Before the trial begins, Bundy's lawyers will ask the judge to throw out two key pieces of pretrial testimony. One is from a woman student. She says she saw the man who ran from the sorority house on the night of the murder. Another is from a dental expert. He says that the teeth marks found on the buttocks of one of the victims could only have been made by Theodore Bundy. Ike Siemens, NBC News, Miami.
34 minutes after 8 o'clock. Back with the weather report after a accused of fraud and tax evasion. In Miami, Judge Edward Cowart is expected to rule today on two defense motions in the trial of Theodore Bundy. He's accused of murdering two co-eds at Florida State University. The judge heard testimony on one of those motions yesterday. Here are details from Mark Potter of station WCKT.
I do. Bundy took the witness stand wearing a sport coat and a Seattle Mariners t-shirt.
Would you please state your full name for the record? Theodore Bundy.
Theodore Robert Bundy.
He was questioned by one of his attorneys during a pretrial hearing outside the presence of the jury. Bundy is acting as part of his own defense team and is trying to prevent evidence seized during a 1975 arrest in Granger, Utah, from being used in his murder trial in Miami. He claims that a pair of handcuffs and a pantyhose mask were taken from his car by patrolmen who did not tell him he could refuse such a search. He also claimed that a patrolman threatened him.
Well, after the stop had occurred, I exited my car, and the officer, Hayward, had left his car and approached me, and the first thing he said to me was, "Why didn't you get out of your car and run? I could have taken your head off."
Judge Edward Cowart has not yet ruled on Bundy's request to suppress the evidence. He also has not ruled on a defense motion to bar the testimony of Nita Neary, a one-time Florida State University co-ed who was the prosecution's main witness. Neary says she is positive she saw Bundy leaving the Chi Omega sorority house carrying a club the night two co-eds were brutally murdered there. Bundy is accused of those crimes. Mark Potter for NBC News, Miami.
5 months after her release from prison, Patricia Hearst has taken up a new cause.
electric chair, the first man to be executed against his will in this country in 12 years. In Miami, the trial of Theodore Bundy for murdering 2 co-eds continued. Diane Wildman covered today's session.
The televised murder trial of 31-year-old Theodore Bundy started late this morning. Bundy had refused to show up on time, protesting conditions at the Dade County Jail. Earlier, Judge Edward Cowart learned that Bundy had broken a light bulb in his cell and stuffed paper in the lock. The angry judge held him in contempt of court.
Since I have been in Dade County, I have been allowed to...
Don't shake your finger at me, young man. Don't shake your finger at me, young man.
Bundy's jail cell behavior was in marked contrast to his calm courtroom demeanor. He is acting as his own lawyer in this trial, having once studied law at the University of Utah. He has also served as a social worker and political campaign chairman. Bundy is accused of murdering 2 women and attacking 3 others at this Florida State University sorority house last year. 2 of the victims, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, were strangled with a nylon stocking. This afternoon, a key prosecution witness, Nita Neary, told the jury she had seen a man resembling Bundy at the sorority house on the night of the murders.
What I noticed most with the profile was had a very prominent nose, a straight bridge that almost came to a point, not quite, very thin lips.
Bundy could receive the death penalty if found guilty. But if this jury decides he's innocent, he will still not go free. He is wanted for questioning in at least 36 other cases of rape and murder in 4 states. Diane Wildman, NBC News, Miami.
The first European Parliament with members elected in direct...
intend to shoot the elephant. John Dansley, NBC News, at the White House.
The prosecution presents more evidence today in the trial of a man who is charged with murdering 2 Florida State University co-eds. There was a dramatic moment in that trial yesterday, as Diane Wildman now reports from Miami Beach.
31-year-old Ted Bundy is accused of murdering 2 Florida State University students last year. Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman were found strangled with a nylon stocking at this sorority house, where 3 other women were beaten the same night. Bundy is charged in those attacks as well. When he was arrested, he had been an escapee from a Colorado prison, but his courtroom behavior is not that of a typical convict. He's acting as his own lawyer, having once studied law. He's also a former social worker and a political campaign activist. The strongest prosecution witness so far appeared yesterday afternoon, Nita Neary, a sorority sister of the victims. She told the jury that on the night of the murders, she saw a man who looked like Bundy leaving the house.
What I noticed most with the profile was had a very prominent nose, a straight bridge that almost came to a point, not quite, very thin lips, clean shaven. I commented earlier, nice looking almost, if you want. He was slight.
When the prosecutor asked if she saw that man in the courtroom, Neary pointed to Bundy. Bundy is wanted for questioning in at least 36 other cases of rape and murder in 4 states. It's clear that even if this jury finds him not guilty, he will not soon go free. Diane Wildman, NBC News, Miami.
The 21-month-old Henson twins went home yesterday in Salt Lake City.
Willie Monroe, NBC News, Jacksonville, Arkansas.
In Miami, the case against Theodore Bundy went to the jury today. He's the law school dropout accused of killing 2 Florida State University students. Diane Wildman has a report.
As he has throughout the trial, Theodore Bundy remained composed today, hearing himself described as a brutal murderer. In closing arguments, prosecutor Larry Simpson showed the jury a pantyhose mask worn by the killer of the 2 Florida State sorority sisters. Simpson said the mask showed the crime was premeditated, that the evidence proved Ted Bundy was the killer.
This man premeditated this murder. He knew what he was going to do before he did it. He thinks he is smart enough to get away with any crime.
Simpson reminded the jury of Nita Neary, a prosecution witness who last week pointed to Bundy as the man she saw at the sorority house on the night of the murders. Simpson also talked about dental testimony that linked Bundy's teeth to bite marks found on the victims' bodies. But defense attorney Margaret Good called the prosecution evidence flimsy and unscientific. She said Nita Neary was too far away to be able to identify Bundy. As for the dental testimony, Good reminded jurors the defense had presented its own witness, who said it couldn't be proved that Bundy's teeth had made the bite marks because his dental pattern was so common.
The evidence in this case presents many reasonable doubts. And I would ask you that when you retire to deliberate your verdict, that you return with the only possible verdict, and that is not guilty. Thank you.
If Bundy is found guilty of first-degree murder, he could receive the death penalty. Diane Wildman, NBC News, Miami.
The PTA has judged some television programs, and today it put out a list.
We have some good film to show.
Okay, we're looking forward to that. Let's go now to Floyd Kelber, who has the news for us. Floyd?
Tom, good morning, and everyone. Yesterday afternoon in Miami, a jury heard the final arguments in the case against Theodore Bundy, who was accused of murdering 2 young ladies in a Florida State University sorority house in 1978. The verdict is now in, and here's Diane Wildman.
After 6.5 hours of deliberation, the jury had a verdict. 32-year-old Theodore Bundy remained composed as he listened.
Defendant Theodore Robert Bundy, as to count 2 of the indictment, murder in the first degree upon one Margaret Bowman, guilty as charged.
Guilty of first-degree murder in the strangling deaths of 2 Florida State University sorority sisters 19 months ago. Guilty of the attempted murder of 3 other women students the same night. The jury had heard 49 prosecution witnesses during the 4.5-week trial, including one who said she saw Bundy at the sorority house the night of the killings. Prosecutors said their case was a strong one all along.
We're very satisfied with what verdict we did get in this case. We couldn't have expected it to be any better than it was. We had a very good jury, people that we felt had a lot of common sense and would approach this thing from a common sense point of view. We're just very satisfied.
Did you think you had a week?
Bundy's mother said her son will appeal the decision.
It's wrong. We'll appeal it. It's just... What else can I say? The family will be devastated by this, but we stick behind him because we know he's not guilty, as do all his friends.
The jury will remain sequestered until Saturday, when the sentencing phase of the trial begins. At that time, it will be decided if Bundy receives a penalty of life in prison or death in the electric chair. Diane Wildman, NBC News, Miami.
As expected, the House of Representatives voted yesterday against
He was released on his own recognizance and will be sentenced later this summer. The jury, which convicted Theodore Bundy of murdering 2 young women in Florida, today recommended that he be executed for his crimes. The judge will say tomorrow whether or not he will accept the jury's recommendation. Today there were more arguments for and against, including a plea for mercy from Bundy's mother. Ike Siemens reports from Miami.
Theodore Bundy's mother had pleaded with the jury to spare her eldest son. Louise Bundy told the same jury that convicted him of killing 2 sorority sisters that the death penalty is barbaric.
My Christian upbringing tells me that to take another's life under any circumstances is wrong. And I don't believe the state of Florida is above the laws of God.
Prosecutor Larry Simpson told the jury that Theodore Bundy deserves no more mercy than he gave his 2 victims.
Give him the same amount of mercy that he gave Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, which was absolutely none.
Late this afternoon, the jury took less than 2 hours to recommend that Bundy should be executed. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. But this is only a recommendation. The final decision will be made by Judge Edward Cowart. Ike Siemens, NBC News, Miami.
In the Northeast today, some power shortages in the area between
the ransom. He was unable to open a bank vault. Theodore Bundy being sentenced in Miami today for killing 2 Florida State University co-eds. Correspondent Ike Siemens in the courtroom yesterday when the jury recommended the death penalty.
The jury could have recommended either death or life in prison for Theodore Bundy. His mother pleaded to save him.
My Christian upbringing tells me that to take another's life under any circumstances is wrong. And I don't believe the state of Florida is above the laws of God. Ted can be very useful in many ways to many people living. Gone from us would be like taking a part of all of us and throwing it away.
The jury wasn't persuaded. In less than 2 hours, the same men and women who had convicted him of killing 2 sorority sisters had this recommendation, while an unemotional Theodore Bundy listened.
We, a majority of the jury at Miami-Dade County, Florida, this 30th day of July, AD 1979, recommend that the court impose the sentence of death as authorized by the Florida statute 775.082, subsection 1, so say the majority, Rudolph E. Tremel, foreman.
But this is only a recommendation. Judge Edward Cowart will decide Bundy's fate. His decision will be announced this afternoon. Ike Siemens, NBC News, Miami.
President Carter going on the road today, traveling to Bardstown, Kentucky. He'll hold a town meeting there.
Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Police in Virginia are investigating the execution-style murder of 5 women in the past 11 days. They don't know yet whether there is a pattern to these crimes, but the murder of people in series or serial murders has police departments across this country worried. As Dennis Murphy reports tonight, they're now working together to develop new leads.
They call it the work of the Green River Killer, probably one man who has murdered 13 young women near Seattle. Case unsolved. On the Gulf Coast, 2 drifters, Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas, have confessed to the killings of more than 200 women and children. Gerald Stano says he murdered 31 women in Florida. Motiveless, random killings, sometimes thousands of miles apart. A Justice Department investigator calls it terrifying, an epidemic. They're known as serial killers, and according to law enforcement officials, there are at least 35 of them roaming the country now, stalking victims.
There might be anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 people killed by serial-type murderers in the country today.
There have been notorious serial killers throughout the country. In Florida, Ted Bundy suspected of murdering more than 30 women. In Chicago, John Wayne Gacy convicted of killing 33 young boys. And in California, Angelo Buono Jr. and Ken Bianchi convicted of 9 hillside strangler slayings, all deeply troubled sexually. Since 1978, 17 men have been convicted of killing 10 or more people.
Historically, they kill certain types of victims, women, homosexuals, and children.
There is almost always a pattern to the killings, a pattern not obvious to the local investigators left with a body and few clues. But the Jacksonville, Florida police hope to change that. As a model for tracking future serial killers, crime analysts there have painstakingly recorded hundreds of details of dress, mode of travel, and method of killing in the Lucas Toole murder cases. The information has been categorized and stored on computer. A summary of the study is on its way to every major police department in the country.
When we start tracking someone like Bundy, who had a particular way of killing, had a particular victim that he liked to attack, analysis can be successful in cases like that.
2 weeks ago, homicide investigators from 20 states met in Louisiana to compare notes on apparent serial killings. By the end of the year, federal budget permitting, there may be a computerized crime center in Washington that will allow them to share information in the same way. The computer may reveal the killer's pattern, but not his identity. Arresting and convicting serial killers is still, for the most part, a matter of luck. Dennis Murphy, NBC News, Miami.
Next, Kenley Jones in North Carolina on an election pitting the old conservatives.
Prosecuted for their political beliefs if they return home. Convicted killer Ted Bundy, scheduled to die in Florida's electric chair tomorrow, today won a 24-hour stay. It was granted by a federal judge. NBC's Kenley Jones reports tonight that this extension, not the electric chair, is what Ted Bundy believes is his due.
Ted Bundy has never believed he would actually be strapped into the electric chair at the Florida State Prison. He was pretty cocky about it.
Mr. Bundy, you told him that you were going to get me. He said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go.
That's what he told a Florida sheriff in 1978 when he was indicted for the murders of 2 Florida State University co-eds. He was later convicted. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were brutally beaten and sexually assaulted as they slept in the Chi Omega sorority house on campus. 2 other sorority members were also attacked, but survived. One of them is the former Karen Chandler.
I think
I learned at probably a lot younger age than most people how precious life is.
She will not speak harshly of Bundy today because she says she feels sorry for his family. But in Lake City, Florida, where Bundy was convicted of murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach after abducting her from this junior high school, people aren't so reluctant to talk. Pat Gary collected more than 5,000 signatures on a petition calling for Bundy's execution.
What people are saying that he should be put to death, but that the electric chair is just not good enough, that he really should be tortured like he tortured his victims.
Police in 4 western states believe Bundy was responsible for the murder or disappearance of more than 30 young women between 1974 and 1978. Among those who disappeared was 17-year-old Debbie Kent, who lived near Salt Lake City. Her family still leaves the porch light on as a memorial to her.
I'd like to have him confess before he's put to death. I'm not really sure that he will, but it would be nice that he'd say where the bodies of the girls are that haven't been found.
Bundy took pride in maintaining his composure during times of stress. For example, when he was defending himself against a murder charge in Colorado in 1977.
I have got to keep myself together. I have got to stay calm. I've got to keep my presence of mind, because as long as I do that, I'm going to beat these people.
But in the end, Bundy lost. Despite today's stay, he still faces death in the electric chair on Thursday unless a federal court intervenes. Kenley Jones, NBC News, Jacksonville, Florida.
Last week we reported on Michael Francis, the young mafia don who bought.
Wednesday will continue U.S. farm sales to Europe at current levels. Serial killer Theodore Bundy has escaped the chair once again. Bundy was to be executed this morning in Florida, but his lawyers have won an indefinite stay while they prepare to appeal his case in federal court. Kenley Jones reports.
Prison officials said Bundy, seen here in pictures taken earlier, appeared understandably nervous as he awaited word whether the stay of execution would be granted. Finally, it was.
What was his reaction? I don't know. His attorney called him and told him, and I assume it was pleasant reaction.
Had the stay not been granted, Bundy would have been strapped into this electric chair shortly after 7 o'clock this morning. He has been sentenced to death for the murder of 2 Florida State University co-eds in January of 1978. He is also suspected in the murder or disappearance of more than 30 other young women between 1974 and 1978. This is the second time Bundy has been given a stay of execution. He is appealing his conviction on several grounds, among them the question of whether he had adequate defense counsel. He acted as his own lawyer part of the time. Kenley Jones, NBC News, at the Florida State Prison.
In sports this morning, the Boston Red Sox pitching phenom finally loses one. Theodore Bundy, the suspected serial killer questioned in the murders of 36 young women, was granted a stay of execution this morning. A federal appeals court halted Bundy's execution just 7 hours before he was to die in Florida's electric chair for the murder of a 12-year-old girl. The 39-year-old Bundy, once one of the nation's most hunted fugitives, was convicted in 1980. His attorney's argument that he was incompetent to stand trial had been rejected by 3 other courts. Bundy has twice outlived death warrants in another case, the brutal 1978 slayings of 2 Florida State University sorority sisters. North Korea's President Kim Il-sung is apparently alive and well this morning. North Korea used photographs,
jewelry, and furniture. Salvador Dali was 84. In Florida, a convicted serial killer is continuing his string of 11th-hour confessions. As NBC's Ed Rabel reports, Ted Bundy is apparently trying to delay his execution, scheduled for the electric chair tomorrow.
That Theodore Bundy has confessed to some of the dozens of murders he is suspected of committing is bringing relief to the families and friends of the victims. Nancy Nottingham was a co-worker of Julie Cunningham, a Vail, Colorado ski shop employee Bundy admitted killing.
Personally, I would feel relief. I mean, you would know now that it's over and that she's not lost somewhere looking for help.
Shirlene Amy is the mother of Laura Amy, believed killed by Bundy.
My insides the last few days since I heard about it have just been, I feel like they're nuts, like they're jumping constantly. I mean, just in anticipation of wondering, is he going to get it this time? What if he doesn't? What if he gets another stay?
State officials say Bundy is scheduled to see his psychiatrist today. The authorities believe he may try an 11th hour plea of insanity to buy more time. If Bundy does plead that he's insane, there is an automatic stay of execution, at least until the state of his mental health can be determined. Ed Rabel, NBC News, Miami.
Turning now to sports once again, Super Bowl 23 was a night for records, a night for freak injuries.
Miro. Dolly was 84. We'll have more on his death coming up later in this hour. Serial killer Theodore Bundy is scheduled to die in the Florida electric chair on Tuesday. On Sunday, in tearful 11th hour confessions, Bundy admitted to 2 murders in Idaho and 8 in Utah. Ed Rabel reports now from Florida.
Diabolical genius, deceptive, manipulative. Words authorities use to describe Theodore Bundy. The authorities also say Bundy's trying to head off execution by confessing to some of the murders he's suspected of and by hinting that he'll provide details about the other killings. Lisa Williams was the childhood friend of Kimberly Leach, the 12-year-old Lake City, Florida schoolgirl Bundy was convicted of killing.
Just hoping that it's all finally going to be over. I don't really feel like any mercy should be given to him, as he didn't show his victims any mercy.
The parents of victim Susan Rancourt, a college student in Washington State, said Bundy's admission that he killed their daughter writes the final chapter to a tragedy.
It's been 15 years of ups and downs, and I think it's probably going to be over. And then we can just sit back and concentrate on the good memories.
Bundy could buy more time by pleading insanity, authorities say. Such a plea means an automatic stay of execution, at least until state-appointed psychiatrists examine him and file a report with the governor. Ed Rabel, NBC News, Miami.
And as perhaps you saw a moment ago, fans of the San Francisco 49ers celebrate various factions fighting in Lebanon. In Florida, convicted killer Ted Bundy is continuing to make 11th hour confessions with less than a day to go before his scheduled execution. Bundy now has confessed to a total of 20 killings in Washington State, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado. Earlier, he'd been convicted of 3 murders in Florida. Authorities say his last-minute confessions are an effort to delay his execution, something that Florida's governor says he does not intend to allow. Surrealist painter Salvador Dali died this morning in Spain of heart failure complicated by...
Good morning. For 10 years, Ted Bundy has been fighting execution in Florida's electric chair. 30 minutes from now, Bundy is scheduled to die here at the Florida State Prison on death row. The 42-year-old law school dropout is convicted of the murders of a 12-year-old Florida girl and 2 college sorority sisters. But as NBC's Ed Rabel reports, as Ted Bundy's execution has drawn near, he has also confessed to another 20 killings.
Hundreds of television and newspaper reporters camped overnight about 200 yards away from the prison where Ted Bundy was scheduled to die. The serial killer has been on death row for 9 years and 278 days. Bundy never admitted killing anyone until during the last 3 days he began confessing to a string of sex murders in 4 western states. But his confessions did not delay Florida's plans to execute him. And just hours before Bundy was scheduled to die, prison officials said he had become remorseful.
He bowed his head quite a bit and appeared to be a little bit upset.
George Johnson, who says he lived in Utah when Bundy was on his murderous rampage there, sold T-shirts outside the prison. T-shirts with Johnson's message imprinted on them.
I'm not making a lot of money on this, but I'm getting a message out.
Bundy was linked to as many as 36 killings and disappearances. It was for the murder of a 12-year-old girl that he was condemned to die this morning. Ed Rabel, NBC News, Stark, Florida.
Hundreds of affirmative action programs could be in trouble following a controversial Supreme Court. Topping our news this morning, Ted Bundy may have reached the end of the line. In just about 10 minutes, the serial killer is scheduled to be executed here at Florida's state prison for the rape and murder of the 12-year-old Salt Lake City girl. Bundy has been linked to 36 killings, but just last weekend began confessing to some of them. Officials say he became remorseful as his execution approached. Several appeals yesterday were denied. The so-called godfather of soul, James Brown, received a 6-year jail term yesterday. You a toaster, you give one to the bank. In other news, serial killer Ted Bundy was executed Tuesday in Florida's electric chair, and he has left behind a chilling account of what he says drove him to kill. In a videotaped interview just hours before he went to the electric chair, Bundy blamed his string of murders on pornography, and he said that he deserved to die. As NBC's Ed Rabel reports, family members of one of his victims feel the same way.
The Rand courts of Washington State glory in Ted Bundy's death. He killed their daughter Susan, they believe, and they're sure he deserved to die.
In fact, I would love to see him being drugged to the electric chair. Now, that may sound cruel, but when you're on this side looking in, that's exactly how I feel.
Bundy blamed a sexual frenzy fueled by pornography in part for the mass murders. And in an interview from his cell just hours before his execution, Bundy said retribution would not bring an end to sex killings in America.
What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me, going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain.
I hope he hurt really bad.
In the videotape he left behind, Bundy said he deserved to die. And despite his remorse and his plea to avoid revenge, none of those whose lives he ruined are in a mood to forgive. Ed Rabel, NBC News, Stark, Florida.
And finally this morning, the Census Bureau reports that government of the United States.
Others are certain to debate the politics of pornography, but this morning we want to focus on what research suggests about porno's link to aberrant sexual behavior. On that subject, both our guests have great expertise. In Atlanta, Dr. Gene Abel is professor of psychiatry at Emory University School of Medicine and medical director of the Behavioral Medicine Institute there. Dr. Park Dietz in Burbank is a forensic psychiatrist who served on the former Attorney General's Commission on Pornography. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Abel, let me start with you, if I might. I don't want to give the comments of a mass murderer more worth than they merit, but how do you view Bundy's comments?
Well, with skepticism. That is, when we've done scientific studies of sex offenders, we do not find a relationship between the use of pornography and the commission of crimes and the use of aggression.
Is the cause and effect being confused here? I mean, are sexual deviants generally inclined to go towards pornography, or does one precede the other?
Well, sex offenders have specific sexual interest, and then they seek out pornography that will match that. It isn't the other way around. They don't see the pornography and then they develop the deviant interest. They already have the deviant interest.
Dr. Dietz, how do you view the link?
Well, first of all, I think it's clear that sexual sadists like Ted Bundy are very much interested in pornography. An FBI study of sexual homicides by Bob Ressler and John Douglas found that 80% of the men who committed such crimes had a great interest in pornography, and research I've recently done with Roy Hazelwood of the FBI indicated that more than 50% of sexually sadistic offenders like Bundy had sizable pornography collections at the time they were arrested. That doesn't mean it made them that way. What it does, according to the men, is just as Bundy said. It fuels their fantasies, gives them new ideas, and makes this look like a more normal activity since millions of people expose themselves to it.
In your view, based on your research, what kinds of materials are perhaps more harmful?
Well, number one on my list as of 1986 was the covers of detective magazines, but the industry was very responsive to a criticism we published and changed their covers. Unfortunately, cable TV and network TV haven't done that. It's the R-rated slasher films that I'd put at the top of the list now.
Dr. Abel, have you found the same?
Well, we're quite concerned about this because a lot of people who don't carry out sex crimes use softcore porn like Playboy, Penthouse, and of course they obviously do not develop sexual deviations. Also, what we find is that sex offenders have rationalizations and justifications for their behavior. And Ted Bundy, being a sadist, like most of the sadists that we've dealt with, have a lot of false beliefs or rationalizations to explain their behavior. What he said, in essence, is, you know, it isn't my fault. These are pornographic things that I've seen. And we just don't see that relationship. That is,
the sadist has the sexual arousal first, then he seeks out the behavior.
What other influences, gentlemen, are most common to the background of sexual offenders? How big a common factor, for example, is a troubled home life?
Very big, and alcoholism would be the two biggest.
In the sadists that we've worked with, what we see is experiences as a youth have some profound influences. For example, a sadist like Bundy developed that interest because he was having pneumonia when he was a youngster, and nurses and mother held him down while he got injections over time of antibiotics. That experience then he uses during sexual arousal over months, weeks, years, and those being forced and harmed by others gets tied in with sexual arousal. Those kind of experiences can have some profound effects on sadists.
We have about 30 seconds left, gentlemen. Let me try to bottom line this, if I might. Would curbing pornography, impractical, illegal as it may well be right now, would it make our society any safer? Dr. Dietz?
Well, it would do more good than banning assault rifles would do. It would help, but it wouldn't cure all our problems.
Unfortunately, the sadist can carry around the deviant fantasies in his head. He doesn't need pornography to get such fantasy.
Dr. Gene Abel and Dr. Park Dietz. Gentlemen, thank you.
Surely.
We're 7:22. We're going to be back in just a moment after a break. This is Today on NBC.
Pamela Mills, thank you for joining us this morning. And now here's Katie with a very strange postscript to this story.
Thank you, Jane. Collecting sports cards is a big American hobby. Every year, adults and children spend hundreds of millions of dollars for favorite players and teams in baseball, football, and basketball. But this May, a new collectible series will go on the market, Serial Killers and Mass Murderers. How much would you pay for a Jeffrey Dahmer, now on trial for killing 16? Or would you trade a Ted Bundy, who may have killed as many as 24, for a Charles Manson doing life for murder? You can buy a pack of 12 of these cards for 99 cents. But the question this morning is, are the cards a way to teach kids current events, or just another sign that something's terribly wrong with our society? Joining us in New York is Jan Mullaney of Eclipse Enterprises, which will publish the cards. And at our NBC affiliate in Boston, WBZ-TV, is Dr. Lawrence Hartman, president of the American Psychiatric Association. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Jan, let me start with you. Will Eileen Wuornos be a part of this series?
The most recent serial killer?
Yes.
No. The set began production approximately 1 year ago, and Jeffrey Dahmer was the last recent serial killer to be introduced into the set. Anything that's happened since then has been too recent because the set was already in production.
To most people, these cards seem totally repugnant, without any redeeming social value. How do you defend them?
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of defending it or trying to explain the company position. We've already established a line of trading cards that deal with current events. We publish cards on the SNL scandal, the Iran-Contra scandal, the JFK assassination, and to us, this was a natural progression to do a set on crime. It's a history of crime. It's not just dealing with serial killers and mass murderers. There are 110 cards in the set. We have Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, J. Edgar Hoover has a card, Elliot Ness. So it's really an overview of the history of crime in the United States.
What ages are you targeting?
We're not targeting a specific age. The cards that we have previously published will sell from anywhere. The age group could be 10 to 60 or 70 years old, depending on the subject matter.
So as young as 10 and perhaps even younger?
Possibly.
All right. Dr. Hartman, how do you feel about these particular cards?
I think they're moderately harmful junk, and I think they will be harmful to a lot of kids. And I think there's a very slippery slope that we trod as a society, because we're very interested in free speech, and yet with children there are different values. Children tend to identify with anyone who gets a lot of publicity, and athletes know they have a responsibility. Some politicians and movie stars do. This is a kind of an extrapolation into exploiting children's interests for greed. The idea of saying it's educational is a typical American ploy when you're wanting to disguise what you're doing for profit. But in fact, I think this is a fairly worrisome, moderately harmful piece of junk that'll probably sell well. I'm worried that even having it discussed on the Today Show will give it some publicity.
Mr. Mullaney?
Well, our feeling again is that the approach we've taken to the cards, we're not targeting children. I mean, children collect sports cards.
But they may buy them.
They may buy them, but they buy cards of Pete Rose. They buy cards of Jose Canseco, Lenny Dykstra, who have all been arrested for various things.
But that's a little bit different than being a mass murderer.
Yes,
Surely you can't compare the two.
But from our position, again, we've established a line of current events and history cards. And the backs of the cards are factual. They don't mention the victims' names. It's an overview of the life of the person, the crime, and the punishment. The portraits do not depict any acts of violence.
But just by virtue of putting someone's mug, if you will, on a card,
right.
Whether you're trying to or not, you inevitably glorify them.
Yes, but the media does it also. I mean, the Newsweek, this week's Newsweek has Jeffrey Dahmer on the cover.
But Newsweek isn't really catering to 10-year-olds, is it?
Yeah, but we don't cater to 10-year-olds either. We're not specifically targeting 10-year-olds. I think that's a mistaken conception here.
Dr. Hartman, what about Mr. Mullaney's contention that that you know, they're putting, it's a whole history of crime that they're putting Al Capone on? Do you object to having him appear on a card like this as well?
I think it's, his argument just now is outrageous. Somebody else is doing something bad, so I can do something bad. We've done something bad, so I can do something worse. I can be angry, I can murder, I can mass murder. Why not have some restraint? Why not have some limits somewhere? I think his argument is we're not targeting children. That's nonsense. Of course he's targeting children, and of course it's going to be harmful to children.
Jan Mullaney, would you reconsider this series if the public outcry is so great?
I don't believe we would. Would you consider not doing this show if the public outcry was so great? I mean, I think that as a publisher, we've made a decision to publish the cards, and we're not going to backtrack on that.
All right. Jan Mullaney, Dr. Lawrence Hartman in Boston, thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
It's 7:19 and we're back in a moment. This is Today on NBC.